Like many other people, I like the general idea behind the board game Clue, or Cluedo as they call it in some countries, including the one where I grew up. The idea being that you have a list of suspects, there is a murder theme, a mystery theme, and you're trying to use logic to deduce, to exclude suspects, and to narrow it down to the culprit. The general idea is great. The implementation within Clue I really dislike. I don't like the random element or random movement. I don't know how long it's going to take me to reach the library. And since it may take me several turns, I get to guess less than other people would. And also I don't like how the theme is implemented, that I can yell, "Yes, I am the murderer!" and be right. And when I would be the dumbest detective if I didn't remember that I was the murderer, and I was so happy to announce it to everybody. Sherlock 13. You needed that introduction because to me the idea behind Sherlock 13 was to get the logic, the deduction, the narrowing down process of Clue without those annoying elements. So you're going to have some suspects and you're not one of them. That's good. And you're going to get to make guesses, to ask for information, to narrow down a list of suspects without that random element of, will I be able to move enough? You're going to have a simple rule sheet, very short. You have a stack of sheets that you're going to use to play the game. Each time you play the game, you're going to need one of these sheets. They're double-sided, and you're going to use one side each time that you play the game. Each player has a screen behind which they will hide their personal sheet, and so that people don't see what you're writing there. Also, it's a little bit of a reminder of the 3 actions that you can take in the game. And then we have the cards of the suspect. There are 13 cards, hence the name. They're characters that come from the world of Sherlock Holmes, so we have known faces like Mycroft or John or Sherlock Holmes, or villains like Sebastian Moran, love interest like Mary Morstan, Irene Adler, the woman, and then some less known inspectors that maybe not as universally known, the Saint, Mrs. Hudson. So you're going to have these 13 characters from the Sherlock verse. At the beginning of the game, you're going to shuffle the cards, and you're gonna put one face down in the middle of the table, and that's gonna be our criminal. Yes, even Mrs. Hudson may have committed a crime. Even Sherlock Holmes, which you can see, if you by a crime we mean breaking the law, his record is not spotless. Sometimes he does stuff that is there on the brink. Once a card has been placed there representing the culprit, then we split the other cards among the players. It's 12 cards, so they always split even between 2, 3, or 4 players. Suppose we are playing with 4, suppose we're playing with 3, because actually that's the vast majority of the games that I played. And then each player receives 4 cards. Now you look at your cards, and of course you already know about a number of characters that cannot be the culprit because they're in your hand. Also, then at that point, you'll make a note here of the symbols on all the cards that you have. Say, for example, if I'm Marco, because that's me, I'm Marco. When I talk about a Marco, I'm referring to this guy, in case you just joined my video blog. So I write Marco here. And Marco has 1 pipe, and so under pipes in the Marco line, I write 1. Marco has 2 books, 2 necklaces, and so on and so forth. So for each symbol, I write how many I have. And also here, I crossed out the ones that I know cannot be the culprits. So Mary Morstan and Irene Adler, I know it cannot be them, so I just remove them from the list. After you do that, you do it again. Meaning you tell people to double check and triple check, because if they make a mistake in recording how many of a symbol they have, that throws the game completely out of the window and into the trash can. Not the game as the item, that session, then it makes no sense, and people will be annoyed. So you make sure that people really recorded their symbols, which is important if you're playing with kids. By the way, when I played this game, when people made mistakes, I was always an adult. Sometimes it was my wife, sometimes it was my wife's husband. That's me. When I talk about that guy, that's still me. And I feel very bad, but that may happen. So you gotta be careful. Once we are done setting up the game, we get started. When it's your turn, players will alternate taking turns. When it's your turn, you can take one of three actions. The biggest one of them all, you think you know the culprit, you say the name of the culprit, and you look at it. If you are right, you reveal it, and you win the game. Otherwise, you lose the game, you cannot win the game. You put it back face down, but you still have to be in the game to answer questions. You'll see what that means. Or, if you're not ready to find the culprit yet, then you can take one of two actions. One is, you ask the group who has a certain kind of symbol. Say, who has eyes or who has books. Anybody who has them raises their hand, and they don't tell you how many they have. They just let you know that they have some. And you yourself don't have to reveal whether you have any of the symbol that was asked about. So I say, who has books? He said, I have two, so I know there's two of them in play, and now both players, for example, raise their hand. Now I know that the only way this works is that each of them has one, so I already know that the culprit cannot have any books. But then maybe only one of them raises their hand, and now I'm wondering if that person has two or if that person has one, and that's important. If they have two, then there's 0 here. If they have 1, then there must be 1 here, because 2 plus 1, that's the 4 books. So, the other action I can take is to ask a specific player how many of a symbol they have. So I say, who has books? And this person only raises their hand. Then my turn comes around again, I ask, hey, this person, how many books do you have? And they say 2 or they say 1, and that tells me something. So that's the general idea. What I like the fact that all the questions are public, so based on what people ask, the very fact of asking a certain question may give you some information about what they have in their hand and why they're asking a certain question. And the answers that I hear, of course, people will be making notes. I like that everybody's involved the entire game, because that's awesome. Because you're always involved, you're always planning for the question that you will have, you always collect information, and you're always, working with your little awesome brain. It's a short game. Basically, players will ask 3-4 questions tops, and by then somebody will have an answer. The problem, however, is these 3 symbols for which there are only 3. And why is that a problem? That can completely ruin the game. I'm okay with a game that lasts 15 minutes or 10 or 5. I love Zombie Dice, which lasts 5 minutes, and those 5 minutes are fun. Unfortunately, you just look at your cards, you ask one question, and you may already know the answer. So the game lasted 30 seconds, and victory was handed to you entirely and only by the luck of the draw, by you getting these cards. A very practical example. I have 2 necklaces here. There are only 3 necklaces in play. Now, I look at them, I say, hey, who has necklaces? No one raises their hand. I know the solution. I know it's Mrs. Hudson, because the missing necklace has to be there. Almost something equally horrible, my fellow gamers know that I'm gonna win. Know that I know the answer. And they don't have any way of preventing that. They don't have any way of doing anything other than, be sad about it. Because I asked that question, they see it's a 3, they probably, and no one raised their hand. They know that they probably have 2 of those. And they know that I know. And there's nothing they can do. So what are they gonna do about it now? They're gonna start guessing, because they know the culprit is somebody with the necklace. They know that when my turn comes around, I'll win. And so now the next player is gonna say, Mary Morstan, whatever, with the Erin Adler or Mrs. Hudson. And so it turns into a completely random situation. And it's not, well, look at this actually. If that didn't work, I can try with the eyes. Again, it's really not rare with 3 symbols. They've only had 3 instances for a player to get 2 out of 3. And it happens a lot too often that indeed the card is one of those. The card has one of those symbols for which there are only 3 copies. So the strategy is very simple. If you have 2 of a kind that only has 3, you immediately ask for that. And there's nothing that can break the strategy that we could think of. And so it just makes it very boring and anticlimactic because honestly, I ask who has necklaces? No one says anything because they don't have them. They know what's going on, and the next player is going to try a random person with the necklace, and the random person with the necklace, and then I get the solution. Whoever wins, there was no satisfaction in that because there was never any logic. There was never, that one thing, once we figured out the problem, there was never any logic. It felt completely random. So what do we have here? A game that can be actually very entertaining. Let me clarify that. Can be actually very entertaining when it works, when it just so happens that a player doesn't have 2 of one of these 3 symbols, or they do have 2 and somebody else has another, so the culprit is not one of those. And I haven't calculated how often that happens. But for a game that lasts 10-15 minutes, I like a game that lasts 10-15 minutes that takes 0 time to set up, like Zombie Dice. To me, that still is a masterpiece when it comes to minimalistic gaming. You take the dice out of the box and you start rolling, you start playing it, and you put them back in the box, and that's done. But here you have a game where setup may take longer than gameplay because you give the cards, people make very accurate records of the symbols. Then they double check them and triple check them. Then they ask one question and the game is over. And the game is over. And whoever wins, they'll know that they won because of luck. That happens too often to me. It's just not worth to me to have a 5-minute setup for a game that may last 1 second. Basically, that's, hey, who has necklaces? Nor is their hand. The game is basically over because there are not going to be any interesting decisions to make. Either I win or lose, I won based on luck, or people make those random guesses and they also win based on luck. I'm not willing to set up a game for 5 minutes and play for 1 second. So, it's a game that can be very entertaining when things go right, when the distribution of the symbols among the players and considering the culprit then creates a game where there are a couple of rounds where people are asking questions, making notes about the answers, crossing off suspects one after the other and narrowing it down. That can be fun. But for a small filler, the fact that that doesn't always happen, that there can be too much luck, that to me really ruins the experience. So this is a game that we're very disappointed because when I read the rules, it looked like it was going to be a strict, tight game of logic, and that introduced it that way to my daughter Luisa, who is 8, and she really likes games that have logic. She doesn't like a lot of luck. She was so excited. And then again, when she realized that it was all about the luck of the draw and the cards that were given out, well, at least in many cases, it could be based entirely on the random distribution of cards. Then she also lost interest. My wife lost interest, and guess who else lost interest? Me, this guy. So, it feels like a missed opportunity. I think it could be redesigned, maybe, given a higher number of symbols. Like, we shouldn't have symbols that only have 3. Maybe if you have some at 5, some at 4, maybe that would already mitigate the problem. But there were just too many games that last 1 second for all intents and purposes, and that was annoying, and that kind of killed the game for us. So Sherlock 13, it looks like a missed opportunity. It may be very entertaining when it works, but it may also not work. And then I would prefer to play a game that I know is going to be entertaining and where the degree of entertainment is not going to be based on the random distribution of cards at the beginning of the game.